Well, good morning, church. Bear with me, I'm a little sick this morning, but we're going to have some fun today. I like the 10:30 service. Don't tell the 9 o'clock, but y'all just look more awake than they did at 9 already. But Pastor Tom will be back next week. And volunteers, don't miss that party. It's going to be a great time. Hey, if you're like me, I always feel like Christmas goes by way too fast. Anybody in the room feel that way? I feel like, December 1st gets here, and I get ready, and I'm watching my, 25 Days of Christmas on ABC Family. And I got to be honest, I may lose my man card for this, but you know what? Maybe I'm a man for saying it. I love a good Hallmark movie. I just do. I don't know why, but I do. They're all the same. It's just people fall in love in just different ways, and and then all of a sudden they get happy and the ends. But I'll tell you, like this year, like I'd go home. I'd be frustrated or mad or stressed or something, and I'd turn on a Hallmark movie, and at the end, man, I was just warm and fuzzy. And I'm like, I'm going to start doing this on the regular, But Christmas, man, it comes, we celebrate it, we buy gifts, and then before we know it, it's over. And then we get to this thing called New Year's. But New Year's is a funny thing to me because it's this time where we come up with all these resolutions. We say we want to come up with all these different things that we want to do in the next year, and we never do them. We make this big list, and we never accomplish it. And this morning, if you were curious, the most common resolutions for 2018 were eat healthier, get more exercise, save more money, focus on self, and get more sleep, read more. Some of these just sound painful. Eat healthier and read more. Yeah. I want to enjoy this life a little bit. Make new friends, learn a new skill, get a new job, and take up a new hobby. Forbes reported that only 8% of people who set out for a New Year's resolution will actually achieve it during that year. So it's a 12-to-1 odds. So what does that tell us? Is that we're great at setting goals. We're great at saying things that we want to do, but we're not so great at following through and accomplishing those goals. Well, this morning, I want to challenge you in a different way. I want to challenge you in a different New Year's resolution for 2019. And the title of today's message is a New Year's resolution of faith. And I want to challenge us, and the reality is we all may not accomplish it. We may all not do it. But I would argue that many of us in this room today would say that when it comes to our life, we want to live a life of faithfulness to God. And when we get to the end of our life, we want to say that and hear from God that we lived a life of faithfulness from God. And faith is an interesting word, isn't it? Faith is only as good as the object that it's put in, though. For instance, I love the Tennessee Volunteers. Love them. But I ain't putting my faith in them to win a national championship. It's more like Rocky Bottom than Rocky Top. We need to just change the song because I'm tired of it. I'm about to go apply for the head coaching job myself. But I believe in Jeremy Pruitt. I'm having faith for the future. But I'm probably going to put my faith in Alabama to win the national championship or somebody else. And then, this past week we had Christmas Eve services on Sunday and Monday night, or Monday afternoon. And I had the great privilege of, we had these photo walls out here. And families would come out and they'd take pictures, which let me just say, y'all are crazy. Like, I hope I get demoted to passing out candles next year because it was like Black Friday. Like, people coming out like, take my phone, cutting each other in line. I'm like, did you not just leave church? Like, what's wrong with you? And I'm a simple guy, Pastor EJ back there, he's all techie and whatever you want to call it, cool, I'm just simple. Like, he's always telling me I need different pants or different shoes or, I struggle with Facebook. It's just the way I am, So then I've got to take photos. I'm not the greatest photo taker in the world. I just use that thing like a shotgun. As long as they're in the range of fire, hit the button. It might be crooked, it might be sideways, but boom, got it, right? Next person in line. And as I left the other day, I was driving home and I was thinking, man, all these great families at TSC came on Christmas Eve, and they were putting their faith in me to get a good family photo. All I could think about is probably all the families I failed, right? Because the object they put their faith in, me to take a good photo, was a terrible mistake, right? Because faith is all about the object that is put in. But the good news for us is that we put our faith in Jesus Christ, and Jesus Christ is the best person that we could ever put our faith in because he's never changing, he's never leaving, his promises are always true, he's never going anywhere, he's solid, he's a solid rock on which we stand, and all other ground is sinking sand. If you got to put your faith in something, put it in Jesus. But I bet we all would agree today, if we were to look deep within, that maybe our faith isn't so much where it should be at times. And maybe we don't have the faith that maybe we need to have. I like what Warren Wiersbe said. He said, the unsaved world does not understand true Bible faith, probably because it sees so little faith in action in the church today. A few weeks ago, we had a big student night here, and we began to talk about different miracles and people in the Bible who had done great things for the Lord. And I had a girl ask me later, she said, why do we hear so much about what God did in the past and all these miracles that God did in the past, parting the Red Sea and doing these great acts of God, but we don't see it today? And I began to tell her, no, we do see it today. And I began to list off different things. Because even this church is an act of faith and a miracle. And Pastor Tom and Leanne came here with 8 people, 3 couples, and to what it is today. But then I began to tell her as well, I said, but I also believe some of it is on us. That maybe at times we don't have the faith that we should have. Because Scripture tells us that Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forevermore. And we serve the same God who parted the Red Sea. We serve the same God that did all those things that we read about in the Old Testament. So maybe we don't have the faith that we should have at times. Maybe we don't believe like we should. And today we're going to be in Hebrews chapter 11. You can go ahead and flip there. I'm going to start in at the very end of chapter 10 and verse 37. But then we're going to be in Hebrews chapter 11, which many people call this the Hall of Faith. Because the writer of Hebrews, you get to chapter 11, and he begins to tell about all these people in the Bible who had these great acts of faith. Many of us have probably heard Hebrews 12, 1 and 2. In chapter 12, it says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off the sin that so easily entangles us and run the race marked out for us. And we say that verse, and we say it from time to time, and myself am guilty of it, but we never go back and look before and see what the writer of Hebrews was saying right before it. See, he was saying, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, because in chapter 11, he begins to list person after person after person after person who lived a life of faith for God, a life of faithfulness. But what I want you to realize this morning as well is that when we look at these people in Hebrews chapter 11, when we read these stories, is these people are just like us. They're human beings. They're full of mistakes. Some of these people we read about made just as big of mistakes as they did great acts of faith for the Lord. And we're going to start in chapter 10, verse 37. This is what it says. It says, for in just a very little while, he who is coming will come and will not delay. But my righteous one will live by faith. And if he shrinks back, I will not be pleased with him. But we are not of those who shrink back and are destroyed, but of those who believe and are saved. Chapter 11, verse 1. Now faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. By faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. By faith Abel offered God a better sacrifice than Cain did. By faith he was commended as a righteous man when God spoke well of his offerings. And by faith he still speaks even though he is dead. By faith Enoch was taken from this life so that he did not experience death. He could not be found because God had taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. And without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. That's 1 through 6. And if you were to continue reading down, I'm just going to paraphrase. I'm not going to read the whole chapter this morning. The writer of Hebrews will go on to name several different people who had great acts of faith. Chapter 11 alone, most translations say that this chapter alone says faith 24 times and faithful once. So faith is a big part of this chapter. And the writer goes on to name different people. So next he names a guy named Noah. And many of us remember a guy named Noah, who God said, hey, Noah, I'm going to flood the earth and I want you to build an ark. I think what we often forget is that many people say that when God came to Noah and said, I want you to build an ark, many people believe that it had never rained on the earth before at that time. And God's saying, hey, Noah, I'm going to flood the earth, build an ark. And Noah's probably like, what's rain? What do you mean flood the earth? But by faith, Noah started building. It goes on to name Abraham, who when God told him to leave and go to a new land, by faith, Abraham went. He didn't know where he was going. God didn't say, hey, this is what it looks like. This is where it'll be at. Abraham just knew I'm supposed to go, and he went by faith. Talks about how Abraham, by faith, took his son Isaac to the altar, and the Lord provided a lamb to be slain instead. By faith, Abraham was willing to sacrifice his own son. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau. By faith, Joseph spoke about the exit of the Israelites from Egypt. By faith, Moses' parents hid him in a basket so he could be saved. By faith, Moses led the people out of Egypt. By faith, the children of Israel crossed the Red Sea on dry land. It's in verse 29. Verse 30 says, by faith, the walls of Jericho fell. I love that story. God said, hey, I want you guys to go march around this wall. And then on the last time, I want you to blow trumpets. That's a great battle plan, isn't it? Like, God, don't we need a sword, like something? Nope, just take some trumpets. All right, God. By faith, the walls fell. Verse 31, by faith, the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed spies, was not killed along with those who were disobedient. And then in verse 32, pick up with me right there, chapter 11, verse 32. I'm going to read to the end of the chapter. This is what it says. And what more shall I say? I do not have time to tell. So basically saying, I named all these people, and I don't even have time to tell you all the rest. I do not have time to tell about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised, who shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of flames, and escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned to strength, and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. Women received back their dead, raised to life again. Others were tortured and refused to be released so that they might gain a better resurrection. Some faced jeers and flogging, while others were chained and put in prison. They were stoned. They were sawed in two. They were put to death by the sword. They were about in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, and mistreated. The world was not worthy of them. They wandered in deserts, in mountains, and in caves, and holes in the ground. These were all commended for their faith. Yet none of them received what had been promised. God had planned something better for us, so that not only together with us would they be made perfect. So the writer of Hebrews, he begins to name all these different people. And he begins to mention faith over and over and over and over and over and over again. And then it comes to us. What is our faith like? And today I just want to give you 4 quick points that I believe that we all need to look at and we all need to think about when it comes to our faith. And number 1 today is this. A faith problem is a trust problem, which is a relationship problem. A faith problem is a trust problem, which is a relationship problem. I had the privilege of officiating a wedding yesterday for 2 of my good friends who got married. And they got married, and it was awesome. I've never seen this happen before, but the bride in the middle of the ceremony put the ring on the wrong finger of the groom. And I was just going to keep going, you know, but she panicked. And then she couldn't get it off his finger, and it was stuck. So I just said, I promise I'll sign the papers. It's okay. Let's keep going. And but they got married. And marriage is a great time. It's a celebration, right? The 2 are joining in one to become one flesh. But the reality is that we all know that, at least most of the time, you would want it, is that those 2 people yesterday, if they didn't trust one another, they wouldn't take the relationship to the next level to be married. And all of us, if we're honest, in our relationships with people, in our relationships with others, if there's no trust, it's no good. And even yesterday, they said, we're going to take our relationship to the next level. We're going to be married. And we trust one another. And I just wonder if some of us today are sitting here and God's saying, hey, you know, I know you've been searching. I know you've been looking. But if you want your relationship with me to go to the next level, then start trusting me. Start trusting I am who I say I am. Start trusting I will do what I say I'll do. Maybe start giving money to the church and tithing. Because you say, what's that got to do with anything? Anything. The Lord said, if you tithe, I'll bless you more than you could imagine. And when you don't give, you're saying, God, I don't trust you that you'll actually do that. And I'm going to keep what I think is mine. Maybe God's telling you to go somewhere and you're saying, God, I don't know. I don't really want to go. Maybe God's been calling you and pressing on your heart to do something, but you're not quite there with trust. Flip over to Genesis chapter 12 with me, verses 1 through 5. I want to give an example of Abraham, who's mentioned in Hebrews chapter 11. I've already mentioned it today, but I want us to see it. Chapter 12, verse 1, this is what it says. And the Lord had said to Abram, leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse, and all the peoples on the earth will be blessed through you. So Abram left, as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. Now, when I read that, I think, man, Abraham is 75 years old. He's probably comfortable. He's probably pretty relaxed. He's probably got a good place. He's probably at home where he knows everybody. He feels good. And all of a sudden, God says, hey, Abraham, I know you're 75. I know you might be comfortable. I know you might like where you live, but I need you to get up and go. Where am I going, God? He didn't say. But Abraham immediately, what did he do? He got up and he left. Why? Because I believe he trusted God. He said, if God told me to go, I'm going. I don't know where I'm going, but I believe it's going to be better than where I'm at because God told me to go and I trust him. Look with me now at Genesis chapter 22. Another example of Abraham that we talked about. And we're going to hold your finger on Hebrews chapter 11 because we're going to look at 22 and then flip over to Hebrews again. But Hebrews chapter 22, verse 4 says this, and just to give you a little context, this is when the Lord has told Abraham, hey, go and sacrifice your son Isaac. This is Abraham's response. He said, on the third day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. He said to his servants, stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you. Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife. As the two of them went on together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abraham, Father. Yes, my son, Abraham replied. The fire and the wood are here, Isaac said, but where's the lamb for the burnt offering? Abraham answered, God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. And the two of them went on together. Look back with me at verse 5. I love this. He said to his servant, stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you. Did you catch that? Abraham is saying, hey, we're going to go over here and worship, but then we're both coming back. We're both coming back. Why? Because I believe he trusted God and said, God is going to provide something. I don't know how he's going to do it, but God's going to provide a way through us. Why? Because God had promised him through Isaac that he would make the nations out of him. So he knew God couldn't take him away. Look at Hebrews now. Hebrews chapter 11, where it all comes together. Chapter 11, verse 17, this is what it says. By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had received the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God had said to him, it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. God had told him, through Isaac your offspring is going to come. And Abraham knew that. Abraham reasoned that God could raise the dead, and figuratively speaking, he did receive Isaac back from death. See, Abraham in that moment is saying, God told me a promise that through Isaac, my offspring will come. So even if Isaac does die, God can raise him from the dead, and I'm going to trust God, and I'm going to go, and I'm going to put him on the altar because I believe God will not break his promise to me. He trusted God. It's convicting, isn't it? Can I ask you this morning, do you trust God in that same way? Do you have the same faith in God that Abraham had? To say, God made me a promise and he's calling me to do something that's totally opposite, but I'm believing and I'm trusting God that he's going to have a different way out of this. And I'm going to do what he asks. Do we trust God like that? Or do we go the minute God tells us to do something and we begin to seek counsel from everybody else? Or we begin to try to pick up every other book and pamphlet or something that we can read to try to help us sift through our decision? Number 2 this morning that I want to give you is that without faith, it is impossible to please God. Look what Hebrews chapter 11 verse 6 says again. It says it right there in the beginning. And without faith, it is impossible to please God. Without faith, we can't even please God. Now, there's a lot of people that I want to please in my life. There's a lot of people that I want to be happy with me and be okay with me. I've got a fiance. I don't like it when she's mad. And there's a lot of things that I got to do to please that, in times that I don't because I'm not thinking. If we want to go eat, I want to go somewhere and get a steak or a Big Mac or something, She may want a salad. And I got to give up my steak or my Big Mac to get her a salad, right? But there's one person that we all should say, man, we want God, we want to please, and it's God. If there's one person that I say, I don't care about anybody else, I don't care what anybody else thinks, I don't care what anyone says, there's just one person that I want to please when it comes down to it, and it's God. It's Jesus. And right here in the scripture it's telling us, without faith, you can't even please God. You say, well, why is that? I think that it comes down to obedience. Did you notice that when God told Abraham to go, he immediately went? Because he had faith in God. He trusted God. And then he was obedient to God. God told Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. He immediately started getting the wood. When God told Noah to build the ark, he immediately started getting some tools together and building the ark. Why? Because they were obedient to God. They had faith, they had trust, but then all of a sudden, they had obedience. See, when we're disobedient, we don't please God. And I believe if we have a faith problem, we have an obedience problem. Because we're not willing to do what God's asking us to do. We're not willing to take that step that he's called us to. We're not willing to do what he said even when everybody else is saying different things. You look throughout the scripture, it even mentions in this chapter, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Could you imagine? These 3 guys, and the king says, hey, on the count of 3, I want everybody to bow when the music plays. And these 3 guys are left standing, and everybody's looking at them. Why? Because they knew we're not supposed to bow to any other gods. And we have faith in our God. And we're going to be obedient to him. I heard a story the other day. I didn't share this in the first one, but it came to my mind now the other day about a man who had a dog. And some people are animal people in here. Some people love animals, love dogs, love cats. I'm okay. I'm in the middle. I don't like cats. I like dogs. Nobody get mad at me. But if I got to choose, I like dogs. And this man had a dog. And it is extremely amazing to me how loyal and obedient animals can be at times. This man had a dog. And he was in the woods with him at their cabin. And he left and he said, stay right there. Told his dog, stay right there and don't move until I come back. I heard the story of a fire broke out in the woods. Fire broke out, burned everything down, and the dog died right there because it didn't move. They found his remains right there in the same spot where he left it. And the man afterwards said, I always had to be careful what I told that dog to do because I knew he would always do it. Wouldn't it be great if our Heavenly Father had to think about that? I always had to be careful what I told that person to do because I knew they would always follow through with it. I knew they'd always be obedient to it. No matter what it was, I knew I had to be careful what I asked them to do because I knew without a doubt they would do it. How is your obedience? Has God been calling you to do different things? Has He's been pulling on your heart to take different steps? Have you been responding? Number 3 this morning is that faith is rewarded by God. Faith is rewarded by God. Look at Matthew chapter 25. We're going to be in verse 19. This is the story of when there's a master and he gives each servant a different amount. And he leaves. And when he comes back, he sees what they did with what he gave them. And in verse 19, this is right after he comes back, and this is what happens. It says, after a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. The man who had received the 5 talents brought the other 5 Master, he said, you entrusted me with 5 talents. See, I have gained 5 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. The man with 2 talents also came. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 2 talents. See, I've gained 2 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. Then the man who had received the 1 talent came. Master, he said, I knew that you are a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid and went out and hid your talent in the ground. See, here it is. It belongs to you. His master replied, you wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. Well, then you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers so that when I returned, I would have received it back with interest. See, the master gave each of these people a certain amount. And he entrusted it to them, and he expected them to do something with it and be faithful with it. And he came back, and 2 had been faithful with it. They had done something with what they had been given. And the master said, well done, good and faithful servant. Well done, good and faithful servant. And the 3rd one came back, and he had done nothing with it. And the master's not so happy. See, they were entrusted with little things, but then the Lord gave them more to be in charge of. And I believe faith is rewarded. It may not be rewarded on this earth, but it'll be rewarded one day when we enter heaven and see our heavenly Father. And I just wonder, when it comes to our life, the Lord's given us the breath we breathe. He's given us the things that we have, and he's saying, I want you to do something with it. My greatest fear is that many of us one day we might stand before God and hear him say, what did you do? What did you do with what I gave you? What did you do with the life that I gave you? Do you know what my hope and prayer for every single one of us is? That we live our lives faithful to the Lord in a way that's faithful to him, so that one day we get to heaven and every single one of us hear Jesus say and look at us and say, well done, my good and faithful servant, come on in. And when you look at these people in Hebrews 11, it says multiple times that they weren't living for earthly things. They were living for heavenly things. It says the earth was not worthy of them. Why? Because they were looking forward to what was to be. See, if you have faith, you really can't put your mind on earthly things because it doesn't make sense and it doesn't work. You got to look toward heavenly things. Lastly, number 4. This is a simple one, but faith produces faithfulness. Faith produces faithfulness. You say, what does that have to do with anything? If we all want to live a life of faithfulness, it starts by having faith. Today, tomorrow, the next moment, the next moment, and the next moment. Faith after faith after faith until we live a life of faithfulness. I shared with you before, at a certain time, that my father had gotten cancer and passed away. And before he passed away, though, we knew things were bad. We knew things had taken a turn for the worse, and we knew there wasn't just a ton of time left. And he kept asking for these index cards, and I didn't know what was on these index cards. I didn't know what they were. He just kept saying, "Hey, can you look around the house? Can you find them?" Well, I couldn't find them anywhere. I didn't know where they were. I didn't know what they were, what was on them. I left and I went back to school, and came back home one weekend to visit, and came back home really because we knew there wasn't much time left. And I looked over in the hospital bed, and he was in the hospital bed, and he had the index cards in his hand, and he was just flipping through index card after index card after index card. And in my head, I just thought, I got to see what's on these index cards because I have no idea. And I began to just kind of creep behind the hospital bed, and I looked over, and what I saw was he was looking at verse after verse after verse after verse of Scripture. You say, why? Because he was saying, the Lord has been faithful to me, and I want to be faithful to God, and I want to finish strong so that when I cross the finish line of heaven, I see Jesus say, well done, my good and faithful servant. And can I be honest with you? As a young college kid, I had 2 reactions in that moment. My first reaction was I was a little mad, and I thought, here's the same God that could heal you. Why are you looking at this right now? But then I had a second thought come over me almost as quickly as the first one did. And it was this. If this is what he's choosing to look at right now, if this is what he's choosing to turn to right now, then something about this Jesus thing has to be real. And I say that for this, is that in that moment when I saw his faith, my faith was encouraged. In that moment when I saw his faith, my faith came alive more than ever. And I believe the church today needs more men and women to say, you know what, we're going to we're going to stand on our faith. And no matter what the world throws at us, no matter how bad our life gets, no matter what comes our way, we've got faith in Jesus Christ. We're not wavering, we're not faltering, we're trusting God that he has a plan. We're trusting God that his promises are true. We're trusting God that he is who he says he is. And we're trusting God that one day we're going to be with him forever. And when the world sees that, they can't help but say, man, something about God has to be real. Something about their God has to be real. Let me close with this. Hebrews, two more things I'm done. Hebrews chapter 10, verse 37. It's where we started this morning. It says this again. Let me remind you. For in just a very little while, he who is coming will come, and he will not delay. But my righteous one will live by faith. And if he shrinks back, I will not be pleased with him. But we are not of those who shrink back and are destroyed, but of those who believe and are saved. I think so often, the Christian faith, so many of us begin to shrink back when things come. And God's saying, have faith. Have faith. And let me remind you of this. That as you are having faith in God and as you try to live a life of faithfulness for him, can I remind you that God's always been faithful to you? So faithful that he sent his son to die on a cross for you. And many of you may know this hymn, but there's a hymn that was written called Great is Thy Faithfulness. A guy named Thomas Chisholm wrote it, and I believe at the end of our lives, many of us will think the same thoughts that he thought. See, Thomas Chisholm wrote this hymn, and his health was unstable, and he alternated between bouts of illness and gainful employment, in which he did everything from journalism to insurance to evangelistic work. Through all the ups and downs, he discovered new blessings from God in every morning. The third chapter of Lamentations became precious to him, which says, his compassions fail not. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. He said there was nothing dramatic behind the writing, but there's one part in the song that I wanted to read as we close today, and this is it. It says this. Great is thy faithfulness, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. And all I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. The Lord's faithful to you. Will you be faithful to him? This new year in 2019, could we all just say we're going to have more faith than we've ever had before? We're going to trust God more. We're going to love God more. We're going to do great acts. We're try to do great acts of God more, so that people don't have to ask, man, why don't we just read these stories of old? We can say, look around. He's doing it right here. Would you bow your heads and close your eyes with nobody looking around and nobody moving? Just take a moment. Look in your own life and say, God, where is my faith? Be honest with him. Do you need to have more faith this year? Do you need to live for him more? Do you need to love him more? Do you need to give more? What is it? I don't know what it is that you're dealing with. But what step do you need to take this year that you can look back and say, man, 2019 was insane, but it was awesome because I had more faith than I ever had. And going into 2020, I've got more faith than I ever had in my whole life. And maybe just right there, just say, God, as this year begins, I'm choosing to trust you more and have more faith in you than I've ever had before.